Right.
Because good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to another edition, and we're well past 140 shows now of Capitals Uncovered. And today we're going back to one of our home stomping grounds. We've done Ireland a lot lately. This week we're going back to Pelle's Sweden. Elections are coming up in Sweden in September, I believe. And Sweden, for more than 200 years, has been really the comfortable, familiar, cozy old elder uncle of Northern Europe. Sweden is always there. It's always reliable. It's always good natured. They don't go to wars, uh, but they have a formidable defense forces if anyone was unwise enough to attack them. They're liberal. They're social democratic. They're tolerant. Everybody knows what Sweden stands for. But Sweden is changing, as all countries do. But there is an enormous level of immigration into Sweden that is changing the very nature of Sweden. The nature of the Swedish state is changing. The cozy old social democratic social contract that Americans and Western Europeans and Southern Europeans from a distance always admired in Sweden is mutating into other things. Economic uncertainties are entering Sweden too. Much higher levels of crime, and especially of rape and gang violence connected to the aspects of mass immigration, have also been swamping Sweden and Swedish cities in over the past generation. So where is Sweden now, and where is Sweden heading? Pelle is going to do the first of a series of in-depth dives that we plan into the nature of Sweden and explaining Sweden as it is and as it may be becoming in all its uncertainties to the world today. Take it away, Pelle.
Okay. Well, I think that I wanted to hold a second show on the foreign policy of Sweden, clear nearer to the election. So it's on the 13th of September, and it's interesting. I mean, there are not many foreign commentators or international commentators on Sweden with the expertise that I do. So I'll permit myself. I know it's a small country, but give me it's worth two or three shows. And I was going to focus on the security angle. I'll say a little bit about that. Sweden joined NATO in 2024 after 200 years of neutrality. Um, and they've signed a DCA agreement, which allows the US to set up its forces on 17 bases across Sweden. It's and in Finland, and their laws like they're not American soldiers won't be allowed to be prosecuted, and that the bases will be under American law. There's a tiny minority vote, one or two MPs that are railing against this, but the astonishing conformity on the issue. And I mean, the actual NATO joining was unconstitutional because you had to rewrite the Swedish constitution, which had written neutrality into the constitution. And for that, you need two separate votes in two separate parliaments. So vote, election, new parliament gets to vote on the same thing. But this didn't happen in this case. And so there are some constitutional scholars saying what happened? Sweden isn't legally a member of NATO. I mean, it's completely deaf. No one listens to them because Sweden has a very powerful mainstream media, and they've featured Putin on their front pages, which is the billboards that you also see when you're queuing in the supermarket. I think literally 9 times out of 10 in the last 5 years. And they've never seemed to run out of inventions what to attribute to him. And of course, they're in a hotline with the Swedish Stratcom or the NATO Stratcom, which is incidentally based in Riga. And the Swedes are basically giving full rein to their historic Russophobia, which led them down into the invasion of Russia in 1709 and destroyed the Swedish Empire, which then encompassed Norway and Finland and Gotland has still got the Baltic states, northern Germany. It's a superpower of the region, but all that went away. It might have gone away anyway. I mean, Sweden was a small country, but the Swedes overreached and they were in alliance with the Ukrainians, Mazepa. Anyway, and but they're still, and the Swedes are historic Russophobes. They daren't criticize Muslims. So they're all in favor of homosexuals and all the other minorities. I mean, they're more woke than anyone else. But you mentioned the word Russian, something it's like flicking a switch. And but then you would point out that the Ukrainians are practically the same stock as the Russians, so they're being racist about it. everything you can attribute to the Russians, supposed laziness, harshness, whatever. You could say exactly the same thing about the Ukrainians, but no, the Ukrainians are just like us. So there's a heavy dose of othering. As soon as you cross the Russian border, no, 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 they're Russians, they're animals, but Ukrainians, they're heroes, So there's very much, it's I mean, I guess Poland is equally Russophobic, and the Baltic states and Britain. So it's the northern countries, the ones that are blocking out all peace. But the Baltics were actually occupied by Russia. So, and Poland, of course, was also. But the Swedes have never been badly treated by Russia. I mean, there have been a few coastal skirmishes, and of course, they took Finland and gave the Finns their nationalism. But Sweden itself has never been invaded. Sweden hasn't been invaded by anyone or occupied by anyone for 1,000 years. It's a very lucky country. And if it's anywhere, the sinning is going the other way. The Swedes have gone into Russia. Anyway, so there's a lot of that. But I'm going to talk about that in the next, but it is related to the topic I wanted to talk about this time, which is immigration. Because there are some thoughtful people saying, well, I mean, what is invasion? What is settlement? What is immigration? What is war? What is it what are we fighting for? I mean, we don't examine these things. It's okay to fight for your country, right? Because you're being invaded. Why are you being invaded? Because what's the consequence of invasion? Well, it means that you're going to have to follow someone else's rules, and your culture won't be your own somehow, and you can't make national decisions. I mean, what is it that the French lost? What did the Danes lose when they're invaded by the Nazis in 1940? Because I mean, unlike many other countries, the Nazis didn't left Denmark more or less alone. Perhaps the Nazis is always a bad example because it gets into so many other things about the Holocaust. But I mean, throughout history, it's been okay. It's been an accepted thing that to resist invasion is a good thing, whereas attack other countries is a bad thing, right? But what about immigration? Because what's happening here, we're told in Sweden that you have to worry enormously that Putin is destroying the Ukrainian nation. And both you and I know that's not true. What happened was that the
Yes.
Ukrainian was a mixed country, just like Czechoslovakia was, and the eastern part was affiliated with Russia because of the Russia is a land empire. So the way the borders were drawn in 1922, leaving these in Ukraine, perhaps because they wanted to keep Ukraine divided in a sense. The borders didn't go with ethnicity like in much of Africa, and the reason why Africa has so many problems. Anyway, so these Ukrainian Russians are standing on the wrong side of the border, and I think Russians wanted to rescue them or give them rights. I don't think he wanted to exterminate the Ukrainian nation or subjugate them. But let's assume that the propaganda is true, that Ukraine's culture is under mortal threat from the Russian culture. Well, what does that mean? What does it mean that Ukrainians won't be able to have their special flavored borscht and you'll stop using Ukrainian dialect words or whatever? Because Russia and Ukraine are pretty similar cultures. Okay, but let's assume that that's an okay thing to do. But what's happening to Sweden and Scandinavia is that these countries are also being overrun, except not with guns and tanks, but by mass immigration. And what I mean, the why is defending yourself against military invasion okay, but defending yourself against peaceful settlement of another culture, which will lead to a reduction of the power of your own culture, not okay? I don't understand it. And I think it's something, I mean, one of the reason why it's so prevailed, I think, after the Cold War, I mean, until the end of the Cold War, it was we had balanced immigration in many European countries, perhaps all of them, I don't know. The UK had pretty closed borders under the last Tory government under John Major, but you had the Race Relations Act and you had all those things. So, I mean, Britain was a pretty anti-racist country, but it didn't have much net immigration. So this idea that you've got to have immigration, or you're not racist, or you're an imperialist, or you're a bad person, or you hate brown people. Well, that is a post 1997 thing, right? Because I my stance is that on this show, I've been very critical of the West and its wars on the Middle East. Okay, you can be in favor of that. You can be against racism. You can be in favor of equality for all, and equality for the law that your skin color shouldn't determine your. I mean, it sounds grotesque, but that is not the same thing as accepting unlimited immigration. And I think that the proponents of unlimited or practically unlimited immigration are bad faith actors because they're trying to lump you. They're killing discussion, and that's been the case in Sweden for many years. If you say, "I just want to return to the Sweden of the social democracy," I mean, the Scandinavian social democrats, they were a humanitarian empire, so they ruled. They traveled around. They gave loads of money to Africa, and they presented themselves as the good white man, if you like. And I think that it's partly because the Brits had won World War II in Europe, and the Swedes stayed neutral and let others do the fighting. So there's a whole generation. I've talked about this. People like Palme and Hammarskjöld think, well, we can play the good, we can play the good guys in Africa, and in a way put the Brits to shame, and which was what they very successfully did, and they might have died for that. But anyway, they did that at the same time as they practically didn't have much immigration. They had some industrial guest workers, as Germany did, from Italy and Yugoslavia, and it was quite common for politicians on the left, even until the 1970s, to say, we can't mix up the Swedish stock because we are a hardworking culture and honest and trusting and not very sociable and so on, and we need to keep it that way because that's the root of our success, right? You could say that. You can say that 20 years later. What happened in 1997, I think, and it's sort of the subject of my pamphlet, which is I'm going to put out on my Substack, which is that, in a way, the Americanization of European politics, so that to be after 97, when the Cold War had finished, and I don't know, a new younger generation of politicians, we'd all been marinated in American culture and Sesame Street and all the rest of it. So what worked for you Americans, because you have open, because everyone's an immigrant to America, so you can't really deny someone else the right to come, and you're a large country. That suddenly became the norm for everyone else. Whereas you could say, well, and my sort of thesis is, the Soviets imposed communism in their empire, which is a total failure. But at least communism you can remove. But I mean, mass immigration, to turning us all into melting pots, I don't think it works. And even if it worked, even if we could all become little Americans, and there are lots of people who think we'll get innovation if we become like America, we're hardworking, we won't become lazy welfare cases. But so even if the American system could work economically, there's no rule that says that we have to have it. Let us have it our way. You can be Americans, and you can have an immigration society with massive, what's the word, innovation and neighborliness and gun rules and all the rest, but don't impose it on the rest of us. Let everyone have their own system, right? As long as you don't break the rules, as long as you don't go around killing people like the Israelis are doing, there's no natural law that says you must accept open borders. And I think that the open borders thing came sort of, I'm trying to trace the roots of it, this idea. I mean, because if you look at the old political philosophers like John Stuart Mill or Locke, they didn't assume that you could have open borders. I mean, they assumed that the polity consisted of more or less the same people. And I've said before on this show, even Aristotle, 2,500 years ago, or whatever it was, says that immigration, in that case from a different part of Greece, divided the polity against itself, which is why tyrants preferred immigration, because then because
Yes,
the biggest danger against a tyrant is an autonomous yeomanry, male 35 plus, mature, independent men working together. If you can divide that up in
exactly.
some way, either by feminizing, bringing women into the political system, bringing foreigners into the political system, so that people don't have debate. I used to live in St. John's Wood, which was totally everyone was a diplomat or a foreigner. We couldn't even get our neighborhood watch together because everyone was traveling or of a different culture, whereas in a tight small town where everyone knew each other, you do organize, self-organize, and we do. So in Europe, so immigration in a way has led to the weakening of democracy because people, I think partly because people are the working class, as it were. And I sometimes think one if it's a plot by the bourgeoisie, because I grew up and I was very much aware of how in Sweden, in Scandinavia, the bourgeoisie were always on the defensive. The word bourgeoisie was used, oh, he's a bourgeoisie. You tried to play up your proletarian origins in a way. I mean, it didn't go nearly as
Yes.
far as the Soviet Union, but there was some of that. And oh, he likes foreign travel. Why does he do that? Isn't the Swedish good enough for him, sort of thing? And in a way, they turned the bourgeoisie kind of turned the table so that what was foreign travel to exclusive ski resorts now becomes widening your horizons, and eating foreign food. So it very much became a status thing, and having foreign friends was like, well, cool, and having just domestic friends. But for a start, I mean, the foreignness that the bourgeoisie have, well, they import labor, so they split up the union movement, they split up the sort of working class solidarity. And there's an interesting, the head of LSE, Craig Calhoun, was a sociologist. He wrote a paper that completely defined my view on immigration. He said, when the upper middle class, of course, they get to where they are through their talents and their international networks. But the domestic working class, how they get to places is through this national solidarity of knowing other people from the other working class. They use it through by group pressure, as it were, and that's what they did with the unions. And that's what they. The right used to say nationalism is right wing and the unions are left wing, but actually it's more of the same thing. In other words, the unions was the white male solidarity against the bourgeoisie. Now that was completely divided up by Thatcher and others, and of course they were too powerful in the 1970s. But anyway, this is the way that the lesser able native population get what they want. They band together and create rights. Now, but if you introduce migrants, not only do if they take welfare, they divide up, reduce support for the welfare state, which was carefully built up by doing the 30 glorious years, as they called Europe's prosperity after 1945. You know, step by step, the working class gained more and more rights. Well, that's all weakened now. And so some people say, well, I think that somebody recorded one of our former prime ministers of Sweden saying, well, that's exactly why we want immigration, because we want to kill the unions. We want to kill the welfare state because people don't no longer want to pay for it. And there's an American sociologist who points out the unwelcome fact that the states in the United States, which have the strongest welfare protections, this was a few years ago now, are the ones where the most monoethnic because of the very uncomfortable fact that people are people and they want to pay for their own people. They want to pay for people of other ethnicities. So the more ethnically divided an American state is, the smaller the welfare state is. So we're going in a way. Sweden is turning from Vermont or Maine or Massachusetts into South Carolina or something like that. You know, I mean, it's there are not many blacks here, but there are quite a lot of Arabs. So the sort of willingness to pay for the welfare state is reduced. And you might say, well, that's exactly what the business class wants, you know. So immigration is cheap labor. It splits working class solidarity, weakens support for the welfare state. And for the left, it increases votes because they will vote for the wealth. The migrants will tend to vote for the party that gives them the most welfare because the migrants that Sweden has been getting and Europe has mostly been the people who couldn't make it in the United States. And I was sitting at a refugee center here in outside Skara, and some well-dressed Iranians, you know, they looked like people with options. They're very smart-looking, elegant, spoke good English. They said, yeah, we're all our friends are leaving Tehran, and we're kind of claiming asylum all over the place. But some of the most ambitious friends went to LA, and we're here stuck in Sweden because Sweden gives the best welfare state, you know, without demand. So America attacks is America's where the most opportunities are, the lowest taxes, the biggest groupings, the biggest what's the word, diaspora groupings, and the most opportunities. So it sucks in all the best people, and it's further away, I guess. So maybe that's a bit of a barrier. But Sweden is right next door to Eastern Europe and the Middle East, and it's true. I mean, the probably the we were promised that surgeons and doctors and engineers and programmers would be coming to Sweden and you know, reviving the Swedish economy because you have to realize everyone in Europe has lived on the fantasy, the American ideology, unthinkingly because everyone watches 5 hours of American television a night. So Friends or whatever, I can't even think of the programs, but anything that promotes, and you might argue that Hollywood has been an enormous engine since 1940s, you know, of promoting, you know, in internationalist America, and you know, if you work hard, doesn't matter what color you are, you'll get right, you'll make it right, and so on, and racism and all that things is bad, and so it is. But I think that all these local politicians in Sweden with not much experience of the world, their experience of the world is more or less mediated through American TV shows, which push a very, very singular line, you know, and it's as powerful in a way as communism was, and probably much more successful. But I think it's reached the end of the road. So people who say, you know, half our continent was divided, and the half was normal. We didn't have any propaganda. We just learned the truth. And then the other side, well, they learned communism and they're all totally hopeless. I don't think that's true. I think we're all propagandized from different directions. And an incidental thing I want to say about my book was that the Germans I think the Germans really and the British are in a huge identity crisis, and the Germans even more than the Swedes. I mean, the Germans believe everything the Anglo media say about Germany. Oops. Um, oh, sorry, I'll cut that. Oh,
I was going to say yes. Go ahead.
sorry. Um, the Germans believe everything. I mean, they believe that they were bad people, basically. But they always choose make the wrong decision, and they're always under someone else's thumb. So they've been under thumb of globalist ideology for 30 years, and that's why it's such a painful thing for the Germans to realize that they've sort of been had, you know. And globalization or immigrationism is just the latest belief. I think it's leading to kind of self-destruction. And I think that what happened in the 1940s was that the Americans sent large batches of psychologists into Germany and basically went into libraries and burned a lot of German books with Gothic script. And basically, there's an American columnist, I think she's even Jewish, Cora Goldstein, has written a book about this. And she's from UCLA. She said, you know, the Germans, there was a kind of a very strong cultural movement to turn the Germans into the world's first globalists. So the old paintings, the old books, I mean, Germany was the fount of European civilization. All that literally went out of the window, and it was replaced by this globalist culture. So instead of the old churches of Nuremberg, they built Rothko-style skyscrapers, international business style. Instead of old German paintings, they had Picasso art from or Magritte or the South Sea Island sculptures type, you know. And it was modernism hit West Germany really hard. And in a way, what was left of Germany, there's nothing German about it. But the Germans, I don't know, but I mean, I think Dirk will tell us that the young Germans were told to hate Germany, you know, that everything that coming from their culture was a bad thing. So that's why I think they've been the most vulnerable to this mass migration. I mean, there's a large number of Germans who literally think that the best thing for the world would be if everything about Germany would be extirpated and they just adopted some kind of international identity. Now, what's interesting about Sweden, who was pretty similar to Germans culturally, but they never bore that war guilt directly, although indirectly there is a sense of that. And I don't think it's as strong as in Sweden. There is a little bit of that, you know, um, that if Sweden loses itself, that's just a good thing, and Sweden doesn't have a culture anyway. And there is some truth to that because it never was part of the European civilizational arc that ran from London to Milan. It was a bit remote, a bit like Russia in the sense Protestant, whereas Russia was Orthodox, more successful than Russia, more free, much more free, and all that, but still remote. And apart from small elite in Stockholm, were desperate to ape the latest European fashions to make themselves feel less remote. And so it's easy to persuade a Swede that there's nothing to Swedish culture, and the better they become American or globalist and or whatever, or just listen to the diktats of Washington or London or Hollywood or the TV studios of Broadway or whatever it is, the better, you know. So um, anyway, um, I think that there's I think a lot of Swedes are kind of beginning to see that they're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I mean, Swedes were very hardworking. They had a very strong sense of solidarity. The Swedish culture is, I mean, I don't participate in it. There's a huge gap between me and my girlfriend, even though I speak fluent Swedish, because don't, I didn't grow up with that. And so if I can't feel Swedish, how the hell is somebody who's just arrived from, you know, Somalia feel Swedish? And there's this saying, you know, the Swedish media will tell you, well, if he's from Somalia and spent 2 years in Sweden. He's a Swede. He's got his passport. What's the problem? Okay, but I mean, if my nephew and niece are Brits, my sister lived in Madrid for 15 years. They're not Spanish by any measure. I don't think of you as anything but Irish. It's really difficult to extirpate national identities, you know?
Yes, it is. I fully agree with you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I don't want to deny or decry. I don't want to make a measurement. I don't want to get into all those debates. I'm just saying that it's It's like the minimalist I'll concede everything to the left or everything to the globalists, except I think that there's a value in all cultures, the Swedish cultures, and I think it should be preserved. And if the immigration is good, then that leads me to the election. Because what happened in 2022 was that the Sweden Democrats, they were brought in from the cold for the first time. They're the Swedish equivalent of the Reform Party, and they're used as a support party. Actually, they were bigger than the Conservative Party, but hey, they were not allowed into government, but they gave them support. And so they've done some good things. I mean, they've cracked down on the woke culture. Crime has gone down. The number of shootings has gone down. The gang violence has gone down. Um, they have given police more rights to sort of search people in so-called no-go zones, and they've reduced the number of asylum applications, and they've reduced the VAT on petrol, I think, and other things that like the little people care about, you know. But there's a lot they've left untouched, and they're still handing out 100,000 residence permits a year, which is 1% of the population, changing every year. There's still, and the point is, Sweden's demography is still changing remorselessly, albeit at a slightly lower rate. So I've been looking around. About 35 to 40% of the population has non-Swedish roots. In other words, they're born abroad, and they're born to parents who are born abroad in Sweden. Um, but the estimates vary. In big cities like Malmö, Gothenburg, and Stockholm, it's between 50 and 60%. If you're under 40, it's a much higher figure. And if you're in the school system, 0 to 9, it's also a much higher figure. So the figure for the future looks very bleak. I mean, Elon Musk is absolutely right to highlight it. And what happens is that the third generation immigrants, as it were, they're also absorbed into the Swedish population. So let's say you have two foreign parents, but you were born in Sweden. But if your grandparents were the ones who immigrated, and that's the case with a lot of the younger generations, the 0 to 10-year-olds, they're classified as Swedish, even though they ethnically look completely Somali. So that fact that there's a 50 to 60% Swedes of Swedish parents is actually a wrong figure. And don't forget that the Swedish native population is much older, um, and that the Swedish native birth rate is much lower. And that's another issue which people don't talk about. It's happening all over the West. The birth rate is 1.4, I think. Why? Because all the young boys want to play video games. They don't want to have babies. They don't go out and date anymore because they're afraid of being beaten up by the Kurdish gangs or whatever. It's much more nice to scroll in your internet. They use porn or whatever. They don't socialize. They don't go out and ask girls out.
Yeah,
They don't have jobs. They don't get on
yeah,
the housing ladder because the baby boomers are so old and they're hoarding all the property. It's very difficult to build new properties in Sweden. So unless you inherit or something, it's very difficult to get that first mortgage. So you've got a younger generation that is not really, and then of course a lot of young girls, young women, they want to be lawyers, doctors, and so on. They don't want to have babies necessarily. Some of them don't have babies because of the climate change or whatever. So at any rate, the birth rate is far below at 1.42. I mean, 2.1 is the replacement rate, but that included in that 1.42 is the much higher as yet birth rate of non-European migrants. And the other thing I want to say is that you have this world cultures map. You know, are you liberal or are you conservative? Are you self-expressive? It's called the WAIS. I can't remember. You can Google it. It's very common. It's just called the World Value Survey, WVS. Scandinavia, Sweden is the most secular country in the world, most into secular freedom. In other words, Swedes and Americans and one or two others believe in that you must realize your thrill, so do kite surfing, bungee jumping, YouTubing, um, living your dream. Whereas other cultures think living that doesn't exist, living the dream. It's all about, having children, having families, cooking, and living in that world, And that's not to place a value on it, but the point is that the immigrants who are the largest groups of immigrants coming to Sweden, the Somalis, the Afghans, and Syrians, and so on. They're at the bottom left-hand corner of this scale, and the Swedes at the right-hand top. So it's not. It's like a mismatch there, and I don't think that maybe I'm not the right person to ask about what the situation is happening in the schools. Um, or in the hospitals, in the care centers and so on. I mean, I'll say I've had some experience with the care centers or the hospitals, and it is a large proportion of migrants, I'll say. But I haven't encountered any violence or any trouble in the small town I'm in, and a lot of people are really good people. I don't want to say that, although I mean proportionally there is a higher rate of rape, but I don't go along. I mean, I know that they talk about these rape gangs in the UK, but I researched a little bit, and at least in Sweden, I mean, there's a high level of rape from Afghan males and so on, but it's not like millions, it's a higher. I don't want to go there really, but have never seen any trouble just moving around, but I'm not particularly connected into Swedish society. But the other thing I was going to say was, and all this has happened partly because of this incredible taboo against discussing it. I mean, it's
Yes.
weakening now, but people can still get jail set. I mean, people a few years ago, people were jailed for writing swastika graffiti on rubbish bins. I mean, that's a sort of thing you do when you're a certain age. Swastikas is dangerous and fun.
Now, what you've been saying, Pelle, is fascinating to me. And again, I've done a lot of work on patterns of immigration. One of the improbable hats I've worn over the past decade and more is I put in a stint as professor of transnational crime at Bay Atlantic University, accredited good school, in specializing in postgraduate international studies in Washington, D.C. In fact, when I was there, and I think it still is, the campus included, it was right beside the old Dolly Madison house, where the wife of, I think, the fourth or fifth president of the United States lived, all of more than 200 years ago, very historic part of town. But what I was focusing on then, I found myself focusing on, you can't do transnational crime without seeing how crime migrates. And what one finds repeatedly is that the most formidable criminal organizations start out as ethnic groups, preying not on other ethnicities, but on their own ethnicities. And when ethnicities travel in mass migration, the vast majority of people are usually peaceful, law abiding, looking for a better life for them and their children and their grandchildren. But in their societies, especially if they come from persecuted minorities in old countries, groups like the mafia come over as well. But this was true of the Irish, true of the Jews, true of the Chinese, true of the Jamaicans. This is not something unique to Black or white or Europeans or Africans or Asians or Latin Americans. It's a general human condition. And the great challenge among the law enforcement societies in countries where mass migration comes, and it was true from New York to New Orleans against the mafia in the 19th century. It was true when the Jewish prostitution global cartel that Zwei Dagan uh, 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 acted as predators, enslaving girls from their own tradition, from the Jewish background, into lives of destitution and prostitution and brothels all across the world, across the British Empire and across the independent countries of South America, all across the Atlantic southern littoral in the 19th century. Always these predator groups, first of all, prey on their own. And I think from what you've been saying, Pelle, I think we see similar patterns in Sweden as well. First, they prey on their own, but then when they reach critical mass, they reach a level of sophistication, size, and profits that they can intimidate or simply bribe local police forces where they are so they can operate with impunity. And then they basically have a protected home market. And then, like the American mafia, or the
Mhm.
Jamaican mafia, or the most powerful forces of all, the Ukrainian and Mexican drug cartels in our time, They
mm,
go global, they go international, and they go global,
mm,
but only after they have established themselves in markets first. So there is danger in mass migration as well. And of course, you've also pointed out, and I'd like you to explore it further, this business of identity and the loss of identity that we're seeing in Sweden. And you, of course, seen it in Britain too. But
mm,
of course, there are positive aspects too.
mm,
Christianity has revived dramatically in England
mm,
in the last 30 years or so, or 40 years, as a direct result of uh, West Indian and especially West African mass emigration, especially from Sierra Leone, Ghana, and most of all from Nigeria into England. And people from this background, earlier generations ran the National Health Service, especially you could not, as you know, run the National Health Service in Britain without doctors, nurses, and
mm,
orderlies coming from uh, uh, Pakistan and India, both Hindu and Muslim, and also West Africans and people from the West Indies. So you have this huge positive impact that is crucial for the health and regeneration of society. But you also have these negative groups. And I was struck by what you were saying about the difference even a small, limited crackdown on crime and violence in southern Sweden made. Because we are finding that currently with the Trump administration in the United States. If you crack down significantly on crime, you are protecting not just white people theoretically from black or Asian people or Hispanic people. You are protecting all immigrant groups from the predators in their own groups. You are
mm,
protecting peaceful, law-abiding majority of Muslim citizens from people. From the grooming gangs, from the rape gangs. But if you don't crack down on them, these groups will rapidly rise to become dominant forces in society. It's the same principle as appeasing Adolf Hitler and Mussolini before World War II, and look what that led to. Now, of course, Winston Churchill, neither of us is exactly an unabashed admirer of, but he had a few good lines, and one of them was he called World War II the unnecessary war. In the same way, I think we're heading towards massive civil war across all of Europe because the so-called democratically elected, and that's a joke, unfortunately, these days, national governments are now weak and pusillanimous and effeminate and afraid to protect the majority of people of every background from the predators within them. And
mm.
that is the most fundamental job that government has to do. So I very much appreciate you. You know, do you agree with this? Do you disagree? And most of all, how does this throw any light on what Sweden is going through today?
Yeah, I think that what's interesting is that the debate around 20 years ago in the sort of Gates of Vienna blogs, um, after in the aftermath of the Iraq War, was very much focused on Islam, anti-Muslim,
I
and
remember absolutely.
Islam is constitutionally evil. I've moved away. I used to be about 10 years ago, but now I moved away from that. But I still think I'll answer your question directly. So the predators on their own community, some of them might be religious, I mean, some polls say that 80% of Muslim girls, some of whom have an opening into Swedish society and, feel oppressed when they go back home to their suburbs. And the, um, the Swedes haven't done enough about it. For them, multiculturalism means the right of local predators to oppress religious or gangsters to oppress their community. And as long as they don't spill over into the Swedish community, they don't do anything. So there's like a double
Exactly,
system of
that's the
justice.
problem.
So one of my most, I went around for my film Sweden Dying to Be Multicultural, which you can find on the internet, um, was that I talked to a woman called Sohaila Force, who was a Iranian woman, very beautiful, very sort of feisty, and Christian, converted to Christian. She'd been abused by her Muslim husband, and she came to Sweden, and then she set up a home, a block of flats for women who'd been abused and beaten, and it was like several layers of gates and a high electric fence. And I walked around in this garden. I could see at the back of my neck, I could feel that people were watching me. And these were the kids and mothers who dare not show themselves. And she said they'd really been suffering terrible things. and she'd been sent knives in the post, from husbands who couldn't get and meet their estranged wives. And blood, somebody tried to break in through the window and killed her, and they slashed her tires once, and things like that. Anyway, she said that she'd had almost no. She's very glad to talk to us because we were representing Amazon Prime, because nobody in the Swedish media would talk to her. Why? Because she was racist. you know, so this Iranian woman who was saving hundreds of lives,
Exactly.
and she said
Exactly.
all these peacocks, all these Swedish feminists sitting there in Stockholm and tapping away from their little elegant cafes about evil white men and all those things. Well, I mean, but for them, for in this sort of hierarchy, it's only white men and only men who do bad things. And in the hierarchy of evil, evil. So if you're a Muslim
Exactly.
man, you're part of the hierarchy of being oppressed. So you can't be an oppressor at the same time, right? So they were not interested in that. But it was very much like, you know, they care awful lot if their husbands are sleeping with other women. They're millionaire bond tight finance titan husbands. Who they're fighting a low level civil war with in the villas of
Exactly.
Östermalm. They care about that, but they don't care about the poor Muslim women or whatever in the ghettos who are being abused and having their breasts cut off, or whatever. No, because to look at that is racism, right? So these high educated, liberal, ballsy 40-something women, they only really care about their people, their white husbands and their mates, their tax lawyer friends, and how they can do them in. They don't care about, they're not really empathetic. And this woman said so. I couldn't get them to come down because it would open up a can of worms for them and they didn't want to go there. So, but on the other point about transnational gangs, I'm quite late to that story. I don't have any contacts with the police or anything, but I think that I mean, it's there's a if you viewers go and Google BBC, I'm going to the BBC website, Google Foxtrot Network. It's a Kurdish network, and I'm just reading here. A major BBC investigation exposed how the Swedish Foxtrot network uses social media to recruit vulnerable teenagers as international contract killers. They've killed several hundred people in Europe in the last couple of years. They recruit young
Exactly.
people online using gamified instructions similar to video games to perform shootings and murders for cash. Um, they've prompting a multi-country Europol task force is focused just on them. And in July 2026, a 19-year-old Norwegian national was found guilty at the Old Bailey in London on conspiracy to murder over a planned hit in West Yorkshire. He was arrested by British police inside a Huddersfield hotel room in March 2025, carrying working guns, live ammunition, and cash after being recruited online. I mean, he was an ethnic Norwegian. So it's becoming big news now. And I think that, like the Foxtrot network, they probably use the soft policing in Sweden. That means it's a good base for them. I mean, Sweden has a very high age of criminal responsibility. If you're a teenage murderer, you get off with a bit of social work and playing video games, supervised playing of video games. I mean, it's a joke, and the prisons look like hotel rooms, 3-star hotel rooms. So what happens is that what the gangsters in Sweden, they'll they have a system whereby if they're carrying a gun, they always use their kids to carry guns, and they only themselves handle the guns at the very last minute, last second. Or they have a handover system where the kids and the kids want to do that, of course, because they want to be part of the gang later when they grow up. And if they're under 15 or whatever, they can't go to prison. So if they're caught carrying a Kalashnikov, nothing happens to them. So that's a very well developed system. The other thing I'd say is also, I very much agree, predators, religious predators, if you like, and gangsters do bad things in their own community, and we don't hear of it. And there's a fear of, there's a omerta, there's a silence, culture of silence. I also think that these gangs are probably infiltrating the welfare system. I mean, it's theirs ripe for the picking. So they'll
Oh,
shift
we have
large
documentation
funds.
of that up in Minnesota in the United States.
Right.
It's a multi-billion scam. The federal government is investigating it right now. And the
Mm.
federal government is being ferociously attacked by Democrats in Congress and by liberals across the United States, eager to get narrow ethnic votes and liberal, stupid, know-nothing votes across the United States, uh, trying to stop it. But you're absolutely right.
And also, I think also lawyers. I mean, the lawyers work with the gangsters, and sometimes the lawyers
Of
look like
course, oh, of
gangsters,
course, of course.
and they infiltrate the justice system, or they'll pay off the judges, or they become judges themselves, And so the
Yes,
question is who your loyalties are. Are they to your ethnic friends or is it to the Swedish state? I mean, this concept of the abstract Swedish state speaking for justice, this is totally foreign from people for some cultures where it all matters is the clan and the ethnicity and the group, and that's how they survived, you know?
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And you have to understand what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Now, eventually, after several generations, again, most people left to themselves, but the melting pot may not melt, but it will at least soften things in, and people do adapt in younger generations. But this is a process that, as you point out, and I saw it with people in Ireland coming in. The stories my father told me about changes in Ireland going back 30, 50, 70 years. And today, of course, it's a very different Ireland. Ireland faces exactly the same challenges that Sweden does. And again, when you have small countries, you automatically have small resources and relatively small police forces. And when you add to the fact that these are types of crime that conceptually have not existed in these countries in significant levels before or for 100 years and more, since previous waves of immigration, it means that it's a disaster. And therefore, the law becomes subverted. The law becomes the opposite of what it's meant to be. The law, far from producing justice, prevents justice. It protects the guilty and it exposes the innocent at every stage. The law becomes the photographic opposite of what it's meant to be. The law becomes a joke. As Charles Dickens said, has one of his classic characters say in one point, I think it's somewhere in David Copperfield, I stand to be corrected, but he has one classic character saying, when a man who has a terrifying wife who pushes him around all the time tells him what to do, and then he is told that under the law she is totally innocent and he will be responsible for all her crimes and everything she does. And he replies, Dickens has him reply, so the law says that, does it, sir? Well, I tell you, if the law says that, the law's an ass.
That's right. Yeah,
And
well
that
said.
is what the English law, with all the Oxford trade, high minded, philosophical, pure, idealistic, thoughtful, dignified lawyers I went to Oxford with, who all had eminent careers. And how many of the innocent did they protect? And how many of the guilty did they protect instead? Fuck them all.
Mm.
Their law's an ass. Uh, uh, we both surprised ourselves here. Pelle told me before we began that he didn't think he had much to say about this. From our many conversations in the past, over the past few years, I knew he had a very great deal indeed to say about this. And of course, as always, he did not disappoint. What surprised me was how it brought up so many of my own phobias and obsessions and angers and frustrations and rage, for which I believe I speak for scores of millions of people. And I think that the situation is far worse by far in Britain than it is in America. It's not that we have a lawful working system here. We have a terribly decaying system here. But I think there's more hope here, at least in different parts, partly because America is so huge and disorganized and vast that, by definition, however much goes wrong in America, there are always places where less will go wrong or things will go right. But in Europe, uniformity has been stamped on Western Europe. And effeminacy among males has been stamped on Western Europe.
Yeah.
And guilt about protecting the poor and the weak
Mm.
has been stamped on Western Europe. And Pelle's warnings here is not prophecy, it's observed fact. Till next time, thank you very much.